Yeah. Hello, everyone. Oh, there is. That's fine. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third day of the summer school. And the first talk of the day three is by Professor Preeti Kumari. And today she'll lead us through the workshop on methods and data collection. Preeti is an assistant professor at the Department of Literature and Languages, SRM University in Andhra Pradesh. Her current research interests center on honorificity and discourse syntax, linguistic uh, uh, linguistic politeness, and human and human chain interaction. She approaches these questions from an interdisciplinary perspective, grounded in theoretical and applied linguistics. So, welcome, Preeti. Over to you now.
Thank you so much, Misra. And it's great to see all of you. For those of you who don't know, I did my PhD at IIT Delhi, the organization that's organizing this summer school under Pritha's supervision. So I'm very happy to be part of the summer school here. Okay, so I will share my screen and I'm hoping that everything that I share uh, becomes visible after this. You can see the slides, right? Yes? No?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Thank you. Thank you. Right. So the the outline for this session, it's uh, I'd say it's pretty straightforward, may not be that simple, but I've tried to simplify it as much as possible. But of course, people can take it, and then there can be a lot of questions that can lead uh, from this session onwards. But I've tried to present a very simple idea of what can be some of the challenges that are associated with data collection methods when it comes to politeness research specifically. And this focus on politeness research, and as you have heard from the other speakers the past 2 days, its politeness is really, really interesting and really complex because you see that there is a grammar of it, but there's also so much of context sensitivity, and then there is so much of cultural specificity that comes in when we think of politeness. So all those complications that exist in how we understand the notion of politeness also transfers to the data collection methods associated with politeness. So my aim is to today is to talk about the data collection methods that are very popular and that serve the purpose for an audience that is primarily interested in understanding the morphosyntax of politeness, as is pretty evident by the name of the summer school, right? So we are interested in the morphosyntactic expressions of linguistic politeness and the data collection methods that serve that purpose. But then politeness, because it's such a widely researched phenomena from multiple standpoints, there can be other complications related to the methodology. So I'll start with this uh, very popular, well-known, simple idea, and the most common method of collecting data for any morphosyntactic study is questionnaire. So we elicit data using questionnaires. So let's do this quick exercise of what a possible politeness related or questionnaire would look like. So let's say that it's just an imaginary language, and let's say it has at least two pronouns, right? I'm just calling it non-honorific, the other could be honorific, but at least. So it's a very simple structure as far as politeness distinction in pronouns are considered. And we want to collect data for one of these pronouns. It can be the non-honorific pronoun. So this is what your initial set of questions would look like, right? So now you want to test or you want to collect sentences. So you have two variables here. So you want to understand how people use the second person non-honorific pronoun in this language. Uh, I'm sorry, I think something's happening, like I think somebody else has control over my screen because somebody just scribbled on this presentation. So I don't know how that's happening.
I think it might be me because I was trying to make notes, but locally, pretty sorry about that.
And-
Sorry about that. I'm going to close this immediately. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I kind of saw your name going everywhere on the screen, but I wasn't sure what was happening. So it's okay, no problem. Right. So this is what
So,
a potential questionnaire would look like. So you want to test what the second person non-honorific, the conditions for the use of second person non-honorific pronoun in this imaginary language. And you want to see how people use this pronoun when they're speaking to somebody familiar versus somebody unfamiliar. But these are not the only two variables, right? You also want to see whether gender has an impact on this. So whether the choice of pronoun changes when you're talking to a masculine addressee versus a feminine addressee, a singular addressee versus a plural addressee. So does gender interact with honorificity? Does number interact with honorificity? And you want to see all of this under the social variable of familiarity, right? So how many sentences do you have now? You have 8 sentences for figuring out second person non-honorific pronoun in this language. But as we have heard in the past 2 days, and as you may know from before, that these are not the only two variables, right? So you would want to test out the use of this pronoun for other variables, such as it could be age or it could be social hierarchy. So again, you would have two variables. Let's say you want to test out how this pronoun is used when the addressee is somebody elder versus somebody younger. And again, you want to test this out for masculine, feminine, singular, plural. So you have another 8 set of sentences. And there can be more context. You want to see for all those addressees, you want to see how the choice of pronoun changes when the conversation happens in a formal context versus an informal context, right? So you again have 8 set of sentences. So what would a questionnaire look like when you want to test out the use of pronouns, or when you want to understand the politeness system of a language, and you want to understand it in detail, how it interacts with other features in a language, how it interacts with other social variables. And while the tables were from an imaginary language, this exercise in itself was not imaginary. So we prepared a detailed questionnaire like this, and I was briefly associated with this project during my doctoral research, and then this was continued and carried forward, and this was led by Pritha at IIT Delhi and Andrew Nevins and Yasu at UCL, and this was a joint project, and I just wanted to show you the initial questionnaire that we prepared and what it looked like when we decided to go to the field and collect data, right? So the simpler ones for, you can see the document now, right? I've changed the document and this is now a questionnaire.
yes.
Okay, thank you. Right, so this is what it looks like. You have an intransitive, all sentences here are intransitive, and you want to understand a sentence like I had slept, but again, it's just masculine here, right? We had slept masculine, and in 5, you have I had slept feminine. So what are the what exactly are the interactions with honoricity that we want to test out here? So in sentence one, for instance, we want to know first person masculine singular non-honorific, right? And then the counterpart, first person masculine plural non-honorific. This doesn't look too bad or too complicated, I would say. But then things can become more complicated. So I wanted to show these examples here. Right. So now we have a sentence like, let's say 9, 10, 12, 9 to 12. So you have a sentence like, you had slept, and you want to test out second person, masculine, singular, non-honorific, but under these contexts. So when the speaker is talking to a male friend, when the speaker is talking to a younger brother, when the speaker is talking to a male driver, or any other similar context, right? And then this goes on, and then you have in 11 and 12, you switch the addressee to female, female friend, younger sister, female driver, etc., etc. And I'm gonna scroll very slowly till the end of this document so you get a feel of what I'm talking about. Okay, that was just the intransitive, by the way. Now we have transitives. Okay. And then, of course, we are going to play with animacy because why not? And right. And this is also a language. In this project, we also wanted to test out for addressee agreement. So I have not even gone there. Oh yeah, now we have allocative agreement on intransitive verbs. And then we have allocative agreement on transitive verbs. Right. So what I'm trying to do here, or what I wanted to show via this questionnaire, is that it can get so complicated, right? And the first time we prepared a rough draft of this questionnaire, and immediately all of us realized that we cannot send a researcher to the field with this kind of questionnaire and expect native speakers, and especially this project was done in rural India. So expect the speakers to give up their lives and just sit with us for hours and hours and help us fill out all of these questionnaires, all of these questions. And another problem, apart from the fact that it was very, very lengthy, only then could we capture the length and breadth of the politeness system in uh, an Eastern Indo-Aryan language. But apart from that, the other problem of this questionnaire was that you also have sentences like, imagine you are now an old person. Imagine you are now a male or a female, or now you are a child, and imagine that you are now talking to your grandmother, now you're talking to your grandfather. So I hope everybody gets an idea that these kinds of politeness related data require that we fix a lot of context. And then in every sentence, we control for each variable in that context. While this is important for our research, it seems like this is a really tough task to execute. So what did we do then? We stayed with this traditional idea of a questionnaire. We can control for the context. We can control for each feature that we want to see how it interacts with honorificity. So we can change from masculine to feminine, singular to plural. But we also wanted to be a little creative so that our speakers don't run away, right? So now this is what we did. Right. The questionnaire that I present now, it's in English, but of course we had in Hindi because speakers understood Hindi, although they were not native speakers of Hindi, but they did understand. I see a raised hand. Should I? Okay, maybe I just show this and then I can take up the question. Okay. Right. So this is what we did then. Instead of going with this very verbal cue that imagine you are this, imagine you are that, and now you are in this context, we went with a picture book. the picture book still had all the sentences that we wanted to get data for, but it reduced a lot of this imaginary context and presented a lot of visual cues. So, for example, now I want a sentence where there is no addressee, and we just wanted to see you, whether the speakers think of or use these addressee oriented markers when they are just thinking aloud. So, kind of a self talk, So, in a thought cloud kind of situation, do they use these addressee endings like allocative markers? So, we have this picture book, and now we give a sentence here. Of course, they are not given sentences like it's first person or second person because we don't want to burden the speakers. But we have this kind of picture, and then so now the speaker thinks of themselves as this grandfather. You don't have to define the context for them again and again. Now the grandfather is thinking of his grandson. So these are all still conversations where there's no overt addressee present, but the grandfather is having or thinking of different people in his thought. But then we also had examples where the overt addressees are present right here, right? So now let's say you are the speaker, and I present this to you, and I tell you that, okay, this is the grandfather. The grandfather is talking to his grandson, which is very clear right there. And then we give them sentence. So you played the whole day. Now come inside and do some chores, right? And then we ask the speaker, so, okay, you are this grandfather. How would you say this to your grandson? What we noticed, because we also did a pilot study before the data collection actually happened on field, and the pilot study was done online because it was also when we were moving out of COVID, but we had not entirely moved out. And then what we realized was that the amount of time that it takes to collect this kind of data and the load that reduces or the speaker's engagement with our questionnaire or with our data, it becomes more seamless when we have this kind of picture book uh, questionnaire, which in essence is still going with this traditional idea of very targeted, very controlled questions, but we are not defining this context verbally, right? So the speaker in their mind, they don't need to keep track of, okay, this is the context now, okay, this is the context now, and they're not getting confused. So now it's very easy for them to look at the picture, think of themselves as the person inside the picture, and then give data to us. Okay, so I saw that there was a hand raised. Do you still want to ask the question? Because I don't see the hand. Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
Uh, yeah, just like, can you hear me? Right.
Yeah, I can.
I wonder where it is possible to incorporate into the study like a possibility of indexicality. Like, I mean, gender, and for example, gender indexicality, for example, it might be the case, and I suppose it's not like in the Aryan languages, but like generally speaking, it might be the case that that politeness is very like speaker dependent, like and from my experience, it might be hard for the native speaker to like change their own parameter, like gender, for example. So even if they look at the picture and see like a boy talking to a granddad, like, and imagine that they are a boy, they like might like, if the speaker has a female gender, may associate themselves with like herself with like a girl. Is it possible to overcome this and like control this, if you, especially if you are not aware, like with the politeness system, if it's not been previously described?
Right. So while I think it's a very valid concern that how much of this role play, how successful it's gonna get when we are on field, But we also, one way of controlling for that is that you don't talk to one speaker. So you try to collect data from a diverse population. So different age groups, different genders, different professions, if possible, which was done in this project. But it's also true that when you go on field, you may not find uh, all of these, you may not be able to check all of these boxes, right? Especially these are people who have busy lives, who are, uh, this whole thing of somebody coming from Delhi to collect data, it doesn't fit into their lifestyle. So they're not going to be available for you so that you can control your questionnaire as much as possible. While I think it is our job to get this, but I'll also say that it may be a limitation which may not be done away with 100%. So it can still remain. Role plays do help, but I do take your point that there can be limitations of this kind of role play exercise. It would be a very ideal situation if role play is not needed and you find exactly the candidate that you're looking for the data collection. But of course, there can be further limitations there as well, right? So yeah, the chances of finding, let's say, a male cab driver uh, who has 2 hours to give you data may not be very great, right? So, but I do take this limitation. I think it's a very valid point to raise here. Right. So the idea here, if I can just continue, is that yes, we took a traditional questionnaire and we just went a little creative with it to reduce the burden that we put on the native speakers. But there are, of course, potential complications with data collection done via elicitation tasks. And I don't mean elicitation just as a picture book or via written questionnaires, but this could just be very generally applicable for data elicitation tasks, right? The first complication is that these kinds of elicitation tasks, they can always become a group discussion. And I'll show you some pictures. So this is where the data collection was done. These are all Rajbanshi Bangla bilinguals. And this is Inzamul who collected data for this project, right? And this was done as part of the IIT UCL project. And you see, you never have this very idealized speaker in a very sanitized environment where the speaker is giving just their intuitions. So all of these tasks, also because it's kind of a spectacle, right? When some random new person just comes to your village and they're asking for things that are so mundane for you, right? You don't expect people to collect linguistic data in a village on a random afternoon. So it always becomes a group discussion kind of situation where instead of one person providing their intuition, it always becomes a collective thing. Now, this collective effort, it can be positive at times because sometimes you're not very sure of your intuitions and you need it confirmed. And this happens especially in case of languages that are highly endangered or just languages that are not very much in use. So you need extra help. But then it can also be a challenge sometimes because, and this was noted in Chandra, De Alessandro, and Putnam's paper that, sometimes in these discussions, if there is a dominant group or a dominant individual, then they can take over this discussion, influencing other people's other people's intuitions. So when you are observing these kinds of elicitation tasks, you cannot just go with this, okay, this was the unanimous judgment that was given by this group of people. So simultaneously, we also have to do a lot of this note taking, because, or maybe somebody said something once, but then they kept quiet because the other dominant person started speaking. So they don't want to give their intuition anymore. They just agreed with the dominant individuals or dominant groups' intuitions, right? So it can lead to some data being muted, these kinds of group discussions. And other than the fact that we can go back to these native speakers and ask them again for the data, there's no way that we can control for it at that point in time, right? So we're not going to be like, okay, everybody keep quiet, one person speaks. So that's not going to work. So the challenge could be that that the data that we think we are getting may just have muted a lot of other intuitions that we could have gotten. And again, coming from this project and coming from Pritha's experience with this project, that especially, for instance, gender can be a factor, right? And in rural areas more so. Younger women, they don't tend to be as vocal as, let's say, if there is an elder male over there. So age can be a factor, or gender can be a factor, as well as exposure to different kinds of exposure can also be a factor, right? So who feels more confident of their intuitions, so that person ends up providing their intuition. Now, this is about data elicitation in general. But then there are some complications that I feel or that I experienced during my research were very specifically tied to politeness, right? So, at least in the Indian context, and I can be sure of the Eastern Indo-Aryan context, there is a social perception attached to politeness, and which literally is tied to the linguistic markers of politeness. So, the more the linguistic markers of politeness, it is considered the more polite or sophisticated are the people and their society. So it also becomes very closely tied to the prestige of the speech community. What happens that this perception alters their judgments, where they try to omit and they try to hide all the non-honorific, mid-honorific, or those kinds of forms, thinking that the more honorificity data or the more polite linguistic markers you provide, the better your culture, your language, or your society is represented. And I faced this problem in my own family, and my father was the most annoying person that I interviewed, because he would just not give any of the mid-honorific and non-honorific forms, because he's just so proud. And for him, it's like, oh, it's the best language in the world. We only talk politely, and we just never use these rude pronouns. And I know because he has used them for me, right? And I know because I'm a native speaker of Maithili. And but if I was not a native speaker, right? And if I go to the field and, well, I don't know, maybe they are doing it more because they know that I'm a native speaker, because they know that I'm researching on this language, and then they try to pull all these tricks. But in general, also, people sometimes, at least in Maithili, I notice this very, very clearly, that when you shed light on these particular aspects of language, especially politeness, they simply abandon all the other forms, the mid-honorific and the non-honorific. So they end up overusing the honorific forms of politeness, right? And for instance, in Maithili, you have these pronouns. I just want you to focus on the, so I see a question in the chat. Maybe I'll take it up after this, right? So you have this non-honorific, mid-honorific, honorific pronoun. Pritha already presented this data, but what I wanted to show was, so you have this honorific pronoun which you use for somebody superior. So for instance, I'll use this for my parents, right? And this particular pronoun although it's flexible, so you can use it. So for instance, my father can also use this pronoun for me, but at the same time, he can also use the mid-honorific pronoun, and he can also use the non-honorific pronoun, right? But when I collect data from some people, this is what they do. So they simply switch the use of the non-honorific and the mid-honorific pronoun with the honorific pronoun. So in all three contexts, all they will give is the honorific pronoun. So I also found that if politeness is attached to prestige, then this kind of omission can happen. And if I was not a native speaker, I would not have known about this. Uh, One way of knowing this would be to, of course, again, confirm with more native speakers, because I'm pretty sure not everyone will act like my father. But at the same time, we can also look at grammar books and primaries if they are written, right? So there is I think there's a question in the chat. I- is this a question? Okay, no, sorry, it's just agreement. So thank you. Right. But these criticisms that are there in these data elicitation methods, they can be fixed. There are checks and balances in place, so you can ask more speakers, you can do more controlled data elicitation tasks. So you don't need to simply give up this questionnaire method because these problems or these complications exist. But the more serious kind of issues that were raised about politeness research methodology in particular, these issues have come from pragmatic, social linguistics, and conversational analysis literature. In fact, based on my research, I did not find a syntactic or an account of, maybe other than the paper that I just cited, Chandra et al., I did not find a paper that talks about politeness research methodology from a, let's say, a syntactic point of view, as far as I know. But a lot of methodological research guides have been provided by pragmaticists, social linguists, and conversation analysts. And the main concern that they have is that when we go with these kinds of elicited data methods, we treat politeness as a single utterance, as an utterance that happens maybe almost outside of a context. We don't treat politeness as a discursive phenomena, which always has a lot of intent and contextual interpretation attached to it. And for for explaining this divide, or for explaining this issue that many people in pragmatics have, I borrow this divide or these terms, linguistic versus cultural politeness, from Pan 2011. And what it means is very simple, right? Linguistic, maybe I can just show with an example. It's better to show with an example, right? So here's the context, right? After the wedding, the bride pours tea to her in-laws as part of an important ritual that establishes the newlyweds' relationship with their in-laws. And this is a Chinese, we are talking about this wedding in a Chinese context, right? So the bride says, father uses a formal form of address, and also uses please drink the tea. And father-in-law drinks the tea, gives her money, blah, blah, blah. The bride then says mother and uses the informal address and says drink the tea. And mother-in-law says, yes, daughter, sweetheart, and gave her a hug and gave her the lucky money, right? Now, let me see what is the time, and then we have some time, right? The non-Chinese speakers in the audience, do you have any observations about linguistic politeness in Chinese based on just this example? And can you say which social variables constitute politeness in Chinese based on just this data? I would only want non-Chinese speakers to participate here. Okay, so gender-based politeness difference. Um, any other intuitions, any other comment that anybody has? Let's see, based on just this, maybe Norifacity only agrees with maybe male DPs. Okay, so Right. So maybe only again gender based with the data. Sure. Here.
Hi, could you hear me?
Yes.
I think in this data, I think the third line, the expression without politeness forms, I think it is a way to show intimacy. It's
Right. Yes.
yeah, to show the
That's
connection
right.
with the bride and the mother-in-law.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that, right? But that's exactly why I did not want Chinese speakers to participate because you know this too well, right? But you are right, Ian. Thank you for that. So now Pan points out that if you just look at the linguistic politeness of encoding, these are the kinds of observations that we can come up with, right? As people have also pointed out in the chat that in the first utterance, the bride addresses the father-in-law using a formal address form and also uses a lexical marker, which is please. But in the second address, when talking to the mother-in-law, she uses an informal address and she doesn't use any other markers such as please. But what the bride is doing, and when you go into a contextual analysis of this, as Tian has just pointed out, that the second address actually is trying to show intimacy with the mother-in-law, which is absent from the conversation with the father-in-law. So by abandoning these politeness markers, the bride is establishing a closer relationship with the mother-in-law, which the mother-in-law also reciprocates by hugging her, which again, I'm not sure how true this is, but at least the literature reports is an extremely intimate gesture and also an unconventional one for people of that age. Anyway, but this is what Pan tries to point out, that if you just look at the linguistic marking of politeness in based on examples like this, you will find out that, okay, politeness maybe is gender based in Chinese, it maybe is age based in Chinese, but her claim is that when you go for a contextual analysis or a cultural analysis of politeness, you realize that intimacy also interacts with how you express politeness. So it's not a zero-sum game of whether politeness is present or absent. But what is the relevance of going into this linguistic versus cultural analysis? One relevance that people in pragmatics literature really push for is this idea of how we model politeness. If you remember from the first lecture, Pritha talked about the idea of face, how face is constructed, how a positive face, a negative face. And so, just very quickly, I'm gonna talk about the social variables of politeness that comes from Brown and Levinson's model, which for a very, very long time was claimed as the universal model of politeness, which is that politeness is based on three factors: distance, how familiar or unfamiliar are you with your addressee. It's based on power, where in social hierarchy do you lie with respect to the addressee. Again, this power can be age, gender, your position in society, etc., and also rank of imposition, which is whether you are imposing yourself on the addressee and the rank of that imposition, how great is or how lesser is the imposition, right? And this was claimed to be a universal model. But this is the criticism that Pan has based on the Chinese example that she presents. That well, she or he. I'm sorry, I don't know the gender here. Okay, but this is what they say, right? So within this view, methodologically, the speaker is held as a constant variable in the analysis, free from contextual influence, moods, situations, or social relations, while the factors of power, distance, and rank of imposition of a face-threatening act are held as a variable. Right? So this is what she's saying, that this universal model of politeness considers power, distance, and imposition as variables, but the larger context, which could be mood, situation, social relation, etc., these are just held as constant. The speaker is held as a constant. And she says that I argue that we cannot take a static view of power in our analysis of politeness. And this is one example of power. There are similar critiques of distance and imposition as well, right? So, power relations in politeness behavior are dynamic and subject to interactional components in a communicative event. Power should be analyzed at two levels, at the entire communicative event level and at the turn-to-turn level. And as you saw in that example, both mother-in-law and father-in-law, in terms of power, in terms of social hierarchy, are above the bride. But she can make this power equation very fluid by using intimacy, and she doesn't need to then use the same kinds of linguistic markers for both the father-in-law and the mother-in-law. So what is the point of this discussion? So people who are interested in these contextual interpretation of politeness, they really vouch for a fundamental methodological change that politeness research needs to undergo, and this change is namely or this change is driven by this need to model politeness in a non-Anglo-Saxon way. So Brown and Levinson's model, which is very Western language, Western culture centric, this kind of criticism has come mainly from East Asian researchers on politeness, who say that this methodology needs to change, where you take one question, present it to the speaker, and think of that particular utterance as an individual utterance outside of a context. So this shift requires the need to model politeness in a more inclusive way requires a shift from questionnaires to naturalistic data, where instead of simply analyzing individual utterances, we analyze individual utterances in a context. So this is also a theoretical debate with respect to politeness, how universal, how culture specific. But this is also a methodological debate, right? How you collect data, how you analyze data, that's going to feed into how you think of the theory of politeness. But only if your goal is to model politeness, right? Then this is a concern. This is what I think, at least. If your goal is to study the syntax of politeness, if your goal is to find out what are the linguistic markers of politeness in Chinese, and you come across that utterance, and you compare this exchange with mother-in-law and father-in-law, and if you just want to limit yourself to the morphosyntactic expression of politeness, questionnaires can do. They're not free of complications. It's not like they have no issues. But I think for that particular task, for comparing, let's say, Chinese politeness with English politeness, that kind of questionnaire will do. But this is not to say that we simply avoid all sorts of naturalistic data. And by naturalistic data, I mean when you observe live conversations, when you when you observe live conversations, or you can also give what's called a discourse completion task. If we have time, I'm gonna quickly show an example of discourse completion task as well, right? Okay, but there are some advantages of naturalistic data that are, or where I feel naturalistic data is, of course, very, very useful for us, people who are used to, and people who need a very targeted and a very controlled set of questions. For us, also, naturalistic data can be very useful. So what I'm gonna propose, or what I'm gonna push for, is that instead of a complete shift, we can adopt a multimodal strategy, a multimodal data collection methodology that's gonna rely heavily on questionnaires, but it's also not going to simply ignore naturalistic conversations, right? And I'm going to give an examples of how observing data in a natural setting also advances the scope of our morphosyntactic study. It makes us more aware of what kind of uh, patterns of politeness exist and how they occur in a language, right? And you have also you have also heard of whether the use of polite pronouns is dynamic or not yesterday in Roberta's talk, right? And this is also Martina has worked on this. Right. So this is an example that I came across when I was confirming my intuitions with other native speakers of Maithili, right? And so I know this language inside out. I know that it's extremely rich in politeness. So it has all sorts of all types of pronouns have politeness distinction. It has verbal agreement, subject, object, allocative, possessor. You saw Pritha talk about it on the first day. It also has vocatives, and vocatives have polite, non-polite variations. It also has post-nominal markers of politeness. It has sentence final particles of politeness. So it's really quite rich. And this is also a language which has grammar books written about it. It has research papers written about it. It's not heavily studied, but it's also not completely unknown to the world, right? So I thought that, oh, I know what I need to collect data for, right? So I was trying to control for root clause versus embedded clause and different sentence type and different syntactic positions, etc., right? But then this is what I encountered in a naturalistic setting. And this is not to say that I would not have encountered it through a questionnaire, but maybe sometimes these kinds of observations do help, right? So now, in the previous table, I presented second person pronouns in Maithili, right? And this is now a new pronoun that I'm introducing here. It's called second person HD. And by HD, I simply mean honorific distant, which is that the person, the addressee that you are talking to is you share, they are honorific to you, but they're also distant from you because they are your in-laws relation. So this particular pronoun is only used in an in-laws relationship and not outside of it. And I noticed that this pronoun E is the same as the third person honorific as well as non-honorific pronoun. I'm sorry, it should have been, both of them should have been bold, but only the proximal pronoun, not the distal pronoun, right? So this, by the way, was not mentioned in the grammar book that people mostly study when they by Ram Avtar Yadav, a reference grammar to Maithili. So what's happening here now? I'm just taking the case of second person, right? So second person in Maithili has distinct marking. So this is a distinct pronoun. It has distinct verbal agreement. Second person mid honorific is also distinctly not marked on the pronoun, but it is distinctly marked on the verb. Second person honorific pronoun is also distinctly marked, but and second person high honorific is also distinctly marked, right? But what happened with second person honorific distant pronoun? If you remember from Roberta's talk yesterday, that it's the same as what we find in a lot of Germanic and Romance languages, that it is a recycled third person pronoun, and not just both third person pronouns, only recycled third person proximate pronoun is also used as a second person honorific pronoun. So the benefit of this naturalistic observation, which was not recorded in the grammar books, was that I realized, okay, maybe Maithili is very rich in politeness, and it has this distinct marking for politeness, which is very different from the recycled politeness that we see in French and German. But it's not like this language doesn't have any remnants of recycling. And then, although I'm not a historical linguist, but the books on the historical development of pronouns in Eastern Indo-Aryan language very clearly shows that all these polite pronouns, they evolved or they developed from plurals, which we still find in Western Indo-Aryan languages right now. But because plurals were lost over a period of time in Eastern Indo-Aryan languages, we don't see any remnants of that kind of recycling where plural changes into politeness. The other kind of recycling, if you remember Wang's paper that was again cited by Roberta in her talk yesterday, that other than plural, the other feature that is used in politeness recycling is third person. And I do see a remnant of third person recycling in Methli. And this was very interesting for me because I came to this conclusion that it is largely a distinctly marked politeness system, but it's also a little mixed because there are some traces of a recycling still in the system. And here I feel that this kind of naturalistic data was useful for me, was useful from a very morphosyntactic perspective, not just from the perspective of, oh, I want to understand politeness and its larger context in Methli. So I have this example, but I think I'm almost out of time, so I'm not gonna go into this because I want to leave some time for some discussion. But this is just to show that the syncretism or the recycled pronoun that you see is also exists for the verb. So the verbal marking kin can be used for third person, but it can also be used for your in-laws. Okay. So to conclude, right, the traditional questionnaires, and by traditional, I simply mean the questionnaires that as syntacticians or people interested in morphosyntactic patterns, we go for these questionnaires that have very targeted sentences that are highly controlled for what we want to find out. And they are really very useful for figuring out the morphosyntax of politeness. But this is not to say that the criticism that comes from the pragmatic literature, I don't think that it's entirely fair if we specify that when we are studying the morphosyntax of politeness, we are not modeling politeness in a Brown and Levinson kind of way, where we are trying to explain politeness through psychological or sociological concepts of face, or where we are trying to define the social variables of politeness, or claiming that these social variables are universals. As far as claims of universality are concerned, I think that this cultural, contextual analysis of politeness can be very helpful. But as far as morphosyntactic expressions are concerned, I think questionnaires really are the way for us. And right, so I've already talked about it. So just two takeaways that I hope people take away from this conversation is even when we use traditional questionnaires, we have to be a little creative simply because there is a lot of context that we need to take care of when we want politeness data. So one creativity that I presented here was a picture book that was done in Pritha's project. But I'm sure there's a lot. For instance, corpus is also something that people use a lot these days, and you can definitely think of a lot more. So this can be food for thought. And the second takeaway would be that when you collect politeness data, so of course, if that, let's say, you start with these grammar books, you start with the existing literature, and you know, these are important, these are helpful. But at the same time, a multimodal exploration, it can also open the doors to a new empirical landscape. So, and this new empirical landscape can tell you about politeness in places in a sentence where you would not expect it. And I'm going to leave it at that because Martina will show you examples of where really unexpected places in a sentence where politeness was found, right? It interacted with other elements in a structure. So I think that being open-minded really helps, both in terms of the method that you adopt, with, of course, proper logic and proper justification, but also in terms of you don't know what you will find. So yeah, these are my okay. Thank you. I think I'm gonna stop now. If there are any thoughts, comments, questions that you would like to share, I'd really welcome them. Or if you can just share some uh, maybe some culture specific issues, problems that you have come across when you have tried to collect data for this. Yes, Anna, you have something? Yeah.
I think that it falls into the topic of like hard to interact, but I found my consultant in a teacher role when I tried to like elicit a different topic, but like my consultant was in a teacher role, and uh, they were uh, really reluctant to express any variability in politeness. So uh, so they wanted to like teach me like correct language, how I'm supposed to speak it from my own position. Mhm. So that was really challenging. So I wouldn't like to be focused only on morphosyntactic politeness in that case.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if your goals are defined, if you have this idea that maybe you don't want to stick to just one form of analysis, and you want to explore this multimodality, not only in terms of methodology, but also in terms of how you want to understand politeness, right? Not just as a linguistic expression, but also from a very interactional perspective. Uh, yes, maybe then it would help. But my point here was that, especially for the audience here, right? If our aim is to understand the morpho syntax of politeness, it's important to understand the criticism that comes from a non-morphosyntactic audience, but it's also important to know that as long as you are not making this far-reaching claim that by studying the morphosyntax, I'm also going to present a model of politeness, which I'm also going to claim is universal, I think it should be good. So I think defining the goal and then the methodology should be the ideal thing to do.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a great talk.
Thank you for the comments and questions. It's really good. If there is nothing else that anybody wants to share, then I just had uh, if there are 2 more minutes, right? So I just want to show everybody uh, a, just a slight criticism of relying extremely on naturalistic data. Um, okay, let's see if this makes sense to us, right? Okay, so if you remember, I had mentioned that discourse completion test or discourse completion task in a very naturalistic setting is also, it really, many people think that this is the ideal way to understand politeness, right? And so there's this study where this is the discourse that's been given to the audience members, right? So you attend a soccer game, whatever game, and you are particularly impressed by the performance of one of the players. At the end of the game, you go to see the player in question and you want to admire the player. And then the participants have to fill up the blanks here. What do you say? And then the player responds. So that you define the discourse, but you don't complete it. You ask the participant to complete it, right? So then, okay, so this is a test for admiration in language. How do people admire? Do you see my screen now, this YouTube video?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's another instance of uh, you tell me what's happening. So, are people aware of what's happening here? Does anybody know this reel? It became quite viral. Nobody saw this? Nobody watches viral reels? Come on, it can't be just me. Okay, some people saw it on their Instagram, and yes, exactly, right? So when you compare, so Rihanna is friends with the model who was walking on the ramp, and by showing her the middle finger and cursing, she's showing her admiration to her friend, right? So if I take these two naturalistic expressions of admiration, we don't really have a fair comparison here, right? So going 100% naturalistic, when we are interested in things that are comparable, can lead us into issues like this, right? So we might end up admiring people the Rihanna way, which may not work everywhere, right? That's just what I wanted to show. That's it. I'm done now. I hope I haven't missed any feminine power. I don't know. I guess I'm not as cool as Rihanna to show my feminine power like her. So I'll stick to the conventional. Yeah, Martina, you have
Yeah,
a
just have a comment. I think that's a general problem, a difficulty when you're dealing with pragmatic data and want to try and understand them is like irony and sarcasm, and that is the challenge always, I think, to see, okay, this is what's encoded and this is what's extra. And in this case, the sign itself seems to be conventionally associated with one thing, but then you can use it in a different way, and that is always the issue with doing pragmatics in a way that is like formalizable, which I think it is, but then you always have to control for that. So, and I don't know that we have good criteria yet to distinguish these two tracks of meaning.
right. Yeah, thank you. Yukiko, you have something?
I hope it's working. Oh, maybe not. Can you hear me? Well,
Yes.
okay, it's working. Yeah, just one thing. So, just generally, female and males are socially expected to use a different level of speech styles to begin with. So, in general, like a female has a pressure to use higher speech level, so to say. So, like for me, like I don't use it so much when I type out like what I'm saying in chat. Like people take me as a male. I'm still using some like honorifics and stuff here and there, but it's not decorated enough, right? So that kind of things might show up in the result in which form to choose, like depending on type of questionnaire you use. So might be good to have background informations to go along with the questionnaire. Maybe it's safer, especially like in Asian cultures, like where social norm is like much stronger, I guess.
Yeah, I totally agree. And in fact, the questionnaires that I showed here, all of them had this biographic questionnaire as well. So we did collect all of those data, their background and all sort of social identity that they associate themselves with. We have another one from Yongo.
Yeah, so this is a question I had actually since yesterday. And the thing I noticed is that in European languages where you have the TV distinction or du and sie in German, I've heard that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that Europeans use the intimate or less polite form to their grandparents.
Uh,
And yeah,
okay.
for that
Yeah.
for me, using something that's not of the highest honorific to my grandparents is East Asian horror movie.
Yeah.
So so an idea that I had is that linguistic honorification and the concept of politeness, there I have this intuition that they're not exactly the same thing. But yeah, it's just a hunch right now, but I guess showing intimacy and honoring someone are two different things. So the linguistic model should be able to handle how speaking to your grandparents, both in good manners, can go in the opposite directions.
Um, I'm not a European speaker of
Yeah,
European
I,
languages.
yeah, I can attest to that. Yeah, to like if I would have to use the polite form, the Sie with my grandmother, it would be like really strange. But like 100 years ago, it was the norm. So things have changed. But it's a distancing device for us, like the using the formal pronoun. You're exactly right that these kinds of things need to be taken into consideration when we try and understand modeling, politeness. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yukiko, do you have another question, comment?
Yeah, it's actually for Yonho. In Japanese, to grandpas, that's actually intimate form, like so non-honorific. Because Korean's absolute honorifics, whereas the Japanese is relative. So the proximity counts more than the hierarchy part. So there are some variation there too.
Okay, that's actually very interesting. Because, like, I could imagine, so the only way I can imagine a child using non-honorific casual speech to their grandparents is when they were somehow unable to be raised by their own biological parents. So, a grandma or a grandpa raises their grandchildren, then they could use the informal speech that's usually attributed to using to your own parents. But other than that, I think it's pretty hierarchical for us. So that was an interesting contrast. Thank you.
Sneha?
Yeah, just to add to Yongho's point, like in India also we use honorifics for grandparents, but then in Haryanvi, it's a dialect of Hindi, and everyone is referred to as tu, which is like very informal in address. So doesn't matter if that person is senior to you or younger, the pronoun is the least polite.
Can I just make a quick comment here? If a language has only one pronoun, we cannot really say that it's rude or polite, right? So if tu is the only pronoun that exists in the language, it's like Hindi. Sorry, it's like English, right? You
Yeah.
just have you, and you can't really specify. So it's unmarked for any kind of politeness distinction. But the reason Haryanvi gets this impression that it's very, people speak rudely, it's because it's very close to Hindi speaking areas. And mostly people who speak Haryanvi are also speakers of Hindi. So now they have a comparative framework. But I'm just imagine if this was a language which was not so closely related to other languages that have layers of honorificity, we wouldn't really be saying this about the language. So it gets that perception, but it's not really a linguistic marker of it's unspecified for politeness because there's just one pronoun.
So just because of the proximity to a language which has. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you so much, Preeti, for such a wonderful talk that led to such an engaging discussion at the end. Now we'll have to take a quick break, and we hope to see you all in 1 hour for Professor Martina Wilsco's talk.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Bye bye.
it's actually in 50 minutes.
Bye bye. Take care.
Bye.